My name is Julia. I'm 27 years old, and for a long time I thought I had seen everything in this life. I've worked as a night security guard for almost 5 years, and I can guarantee that I've been through strange situations, unexplainable noises, shadows that seem to move on their own. But nothing, absolutely nothing compares to what happened in that commercial building where I worked for 6 months. I need to tell this story because I still haven't been able to fully process what I experienced. And maybe by sharing it with you, I can finally understand or at least accept it. It all started when I got a temporary job at a 17-story corporate building. The pay was excellent, well above average, and that should have been the first warning sign. But I needed money, I had accumulated bills, and the offer seemed perfect. The shift was from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, Monday through Friday. Empty building, just me and one other security guard who stayed at the main entrance. My job was simple. Make rounds every 2 hours, check that all doors were locked, that nothing was out of place. In the first week, everything went well. The building was quiet, modern, with that characteristic smell of new carpet and cold air conditioning. I would walk through the hallways with my flashlight, check the rooms, write everything down in my report. It was boring but peaceful. The kind of work I preferred, no surprises, no problems. It was in the second week that I started noticing something strange. Always around midnight, the central elevator would start moving on its own. I would hear the characteristic sound of the motor, see the numbers light up on the hallway panel, 3rd floor, 7th floor, 12th floor, basement. It would go up and down nonstop, as if someone inside was calling the floors randomly. But when I checked the security cameras, the elevator was always empty. At first, I thought it was some technical problem. Old elevators sometimes do that, right? Some defect in the system, some stuck button. But the building was new, the elevators were state-of-the-art, and this behavior always happened at the same time. Always at midnight sharp. And it lasted exactly 43 minutes. I timed it several times. 43 minutes of uninterrupted ups and downs, and then suddenly it would stop. The elevator would return to the ground floor. The doors would open, and everything would be silent again. I mentioned this to the other security guard, a man named Roberto who had worked in the building for years. He just shrugged and said, "Better not get involved in that, girl. Just do your job and ignore it." The way he spoke, the way he looked away, that deeply bothered me. It was as if he knew something but didn't want to tell. During the following weeks, I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. Every night, exactly at midnight, the elevator would begin its macabre dance. I would sit at my desk hearing that mechanical sound, watching the floor lights turn on in sequence on the panel. I started having nightmares. I dreamed I was inside the elevator, that the doors wouldn't open anymore, that I went up and down eternally in that metal box. That's when I decided to investigate on my own. One night, just before midnight, I positioned myself in front of the central elevator with my flashlight and my radio. My heart was racing, my hands were sweating. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I needed to understand what was happening. When the clock struck midnight, the elevator started moving. I heard the motor come to life, saw the panel light up. The elevator was coming down from the 15th floor. When it reached the ground floor, the doors opened with a soft ding. I pointed my flashlight inside. It was empty, completely empty, but there was something different. The air coming out of the elevator was freezing, much colder than the building's air conditioning. And there was a soft smell of floral perfume, as if someone had just left. I took a deep breath and went in. I don't know where I got that courage from, but something was driving me. The doors closed behind me, and the elevator started going up. I didn't touch any buttons. It just went up. My stomach churned with the fast movement. I watched the numbers change on the panel. 4th floor, 5th, 6th, 7th. On the 10th floor, the elevator stopped. The doors opened. The hallway was dark. Only the emergency lights dimly illuminated the path. I knew I should get out, explore, understand why the elevator had stopped precisely there, but my feet seemed glued to the floor. Then I saw something that made my blood freeze. At the end of the hallway, a silhouette, a female figure, with her back to me, standing in front of one of the rooms. She wore a light-colored dress, and her long hair fell over her shoulders. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. The figure didn't move. She just stood there, static like a statue. The elevator doors started to close, and I did nothing to stop them. When they closed completely, my legs gave out and I fell to my knees. The elevator continued its journey, going up and down, and I stayed in there, paralyzed with fear, for at least 15 minutes, until it finally stopped at the ground floor again and the doors opened. I ran out, my heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to explode. Roberto was at the reception and looked at me with an expression of someone who expected that. "You went into the elevator, didn't you?" he asked. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I just nodded, still trembling. He sighed deeply and made me sit down. "There are some things you need to know about this building," he said. And then Roberto told me a story I never imagined hearing. 5 years before, a young woman who worked on the 10th floor had disappeared. Her name was Melissa. She was 24 years old, and she worked late every day for a law firm. One night, she simply vanished. The cameras showed her entering the elevator around midnight to leave, but she never reached the ground floor. She never left the building. They searched for days, investigated, but found nothing. It was as if she had dissolved into thin air. Since then, the elevator started having this strange behavior. Always at midnight, always for the same 43 minutes. Roberto said that several security guards before me tried to investigate, but they all quit after a few weeks. He was the only one who remained, but he never entered the elevator after midnight again. Some mysteries shouldn't be solved, he told me. Some things are beyond our understanding. I should have quit that night. I should have left that building and never returned. But something inside me changed. I couldn't stop thinking about Melissa, about her family who never got answers, about the terror she must have felt that night. And especially, I couldn't forget that figure on the 10th floor. Was it her? Was she trying to show me something? In the following nights, I started doing something that Roberto considered total madness. Every night, at midnight, I would enter the elevator. At first, I just stayed in there, observing while it went up and down. It always stopped on the 10th floor. Always. Even going to other floors afterward, the 10th was always included in the route. And whenever the doors opened on that floor, I saw the figure. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always with her back to me. Always standing in front of the same room. Room 1047. One night, I gathered all my courage and got off on the 10th floor. My breathing was out of control. Each step seemed to weigh a ton. The figure was there, about 5 meters ahead of me. When I started walking toward her, she also started moving away from me, toward room 1047. I followed her. The room door was ajar, which was impossible because I myself had checked all the doors during my round and they were locked. I pushed the door slowly. The room was a common office, desks, computers, files. But there was something different. On the back wall, one of the drywall panels was slightly displaced. The figure was standing in front of it, and for the first time, she turned to me. It wasn't a face I saw. It was just a nebulous form, a suggestion of features. But her eyes were clearly visible, and they were full of a sadness so deep that it made me want to cry. She pointed to the displaced panel and then simply disappeared. Like smoke dissipating in the air, she was gone. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I had just seen. Then, with trembling hands, I approached the panel. It was loose, easy to remove. I pulled it carefully, and what I found behind it made me stagger backward. There was a purse, a brown leather women's purse, covered in dust. I picked up the purse and opened it. Inside was a wallet with documents. The name on the document was Melissa Torres, with a photo of a smiling young woman with long hair. There was also an old cell phone, dead, and an envelope. My hands were shaking so much I could barely open the envelope. Inside, a handwritten letter. The letter was addressed to Melissa's family. She explained that she had discovered something terrible at the office where she worked. a money laundering scheme that involved the main partners. She had collected evidence and was going to report it the next morning. But that night, while organizing the documents, someone found her. She wrote the letter hastily, hid the purse in the wall, and then the letter ended abruptly, with the last word smudged as if she had been interrupted. I ran out of that room with the purse in my hands and went straight to the ground floor. Roberto turned pale when he saw me. I told him everything, showed him the purse, the letter. He immediately called the authorities. What happened next was a whirlwind. The investigation was reopened, the law firm was investigated, and they ended up discovering not only the money laundering scheme, but also evidence linking one of the partners to Melissa's disappearance. She had been murdered, and her body had been hidden. I won't go into details about where they found her because it still makes me sick, but finally her family had answers. Finally she could rest. But here comes the part that still haunts me. After everything was resolved, after the case was closed and the guilty were arrested, the elevator stopped moving on its own at midnight. It simply stopped. No technical problems were found, no logical explanation. It just stopped. I continued working in that building for a few more months. Every night, at midnight, I would go to the elevator and wait, but it never moved on its own again. I never saw that figure in the hallways again. It was as if Melissa had finally found peace, as if her purpose had been fulfilled. She needed someone to find her, someone to discover the truth. And in some inexplicable way, she managed to guide me there. I know many of you will think I'm crazy, that this is impossible, that there must be some rational explanation. Believe me, I wanted to believe that too. But there's no rational explanation for an elevator that moves on its own always at the same time for 5 years and suddenly stops at the exact moment a mystery is solved. There's no explanation for the figure I saw, for the perfume I smelled, for the way I was guided to that specific room, to that specific panel. Sometimes at night, when I'm almost asleep, I still feel that cold air. I still hear the sound of the elevator motor. And I wonder how many other Melissas are out there, how many untold stories, how many unsolved mysteries. I wonder how many times we pass by signs and ignore them because they're impossible or illogical. I was never the same after those 6 months. I changed jobs. I don't work as a night security guard anymore. But I learned something valuable, that there are things in this world that our logic can't explain, that the line between the possible and impossible is much thinner than we imagine. And most importantly, I learned that sometimes we just need to have the courage to look beyond what our eyes see, to listen beyond what our ears hear. Melissa's family contacted me months later to thank me. They were finally able to have a proper funeral. They could have a place to visit. They could have answers. Her mother hugged me and cried and said she felt that finally her daughter was at peace. I cried too because I knew it was true. To this day, when I pass by that building, which now has completely new management, I look at the windows on the 10th floor, and sometimes, just sometimes on full moon nights, I think I see a shadow moving in there. But it's not a scary or threatening shadow. It's a shadow that seems to be waving, thanking, saying goodbye. I know this story is hard to believe. I know it sounds like something from a movie, from a book, from an overly fertile imagination. But I was there. I lived every second of it. I felt the fear, the adrenaline, the confusion, and finally the understanding. And I can guarantee one thing. There's much more between heaven and earth than our vain philosophy can imagine. So, if you're watching this and have been through something similar, something you can't explain, something everyone says is impossible, don't ignore it. Don't be afraid to investigate, because sometimes these inexplicable experiences happen for a reason. Sometimes someone needs our help, even if it's someone who is no longer among us. I was skeptical. I always was. I worked years as a security guard and never believed in anything supernatural. But that elevator, that figure, that story changed everything. It made me question everything I thought I knew about life, about death, about what happens after. And you know what's strangest? A few weeks after everything ended, I was organizing my things and found something in my uniform pocket. It was a small silver bracelet with a star-shaped pendant. I had never seen that bracelet before, but when I showed the photo to Melissa's mother, she started crying. It was her daughter's favorite bracelet, which she was wearing the night she disappeared. A bracelet that was never found with her belongings. How did that bracelet end up in my pocket? I have no idea. I didn't take it from the purse I found. It just appeared. And for me, that was the final confirmation that all of it had been real, that Melissa had really guided me, chosen me for some reason to discover the truth. I returned the bracelet to the family, of course, but before doing so, I held it in my hands for a long time and whispered a thank you. Thank you for trusting me, for showing me that there is more in this life than we can see or touch. Thank you for making me braver, more open, more human. Today, when I look back, I see that experience as a watershed moment in my life. It taught me empathy in a way that nothing else could have taught me. It taught me that sometimes helping someone goes beyond practical and tangible acts. Sometimes helping someone means being brave enough to believe in the impossible, to follow the signs, to not ignore that inner voice that says, there's something wrong here, something that needs to be discovered. Melissa is no longer trapped in that building. She's no longer making the elevator go up and down every night, desperate for someone to notice, for someone to investigate. She is finally free, and I, in some way I will never fully understand, had the privilege of being the instrument of that freedom. If you made it this far in this story, thank you for listening to me. Thank you for keeping an open mind. And if you ever find yourself in an inexplicable situation, in a moment when logic doesn't seem to make sense, don't ignore it. Investigate. Be brave. Because it may be that someone, somewhere, is counting on you to bring light to a story that has been in the dark for too long. The elevator that went up and down by itself at midnight wasn't just a faulty elevator. It was a call for help. It was a story waiting to be told. And I am eternally grateful for having had the courage to hear it.